The Russian offensive began on March 15th with the usual artillery and aircraft bombardment. The Russian superiority in numbers, artillery, and air support was overwhelming. The first breaches of our line occurred during the afternoon, and the village of Kirchberg changed hands several times. Other parts of our front remained quiet except for some reconnaissance activity. The main push was at the rightmost division of General Hartmann's 8th Corps, west of the Neisse River. The Russians reinforced in that sector, and soon they had pushed back our entire front there, and our left flank lost contact with the 8th Corps. The Russians pushed the 90th Corps back almost to Neisse River on March 17th, and a Russian tank unit crossed the river. The Russian tanks, separated from our corps headquarters by only 1.5 kilometers or so of wooded area, drove behind us where they united with another Russian tank unit that had broken through from the south. With that, on March 17, 1945, we were surrounded. It was not a strong line behind us, however, and the Russian tanks were in a difficult situation themselves, because they had German forces in front of and in back of them as well. I was glad von Doving was there, because he had the diplomatic skill we needed to get orders that would allow us to retreat. Without his skill, we would have been ordered to stand and fight to the last man, which would not have made much sense. If we had stayed, we would have lost both divisions and gained nothing. Even if the Russians had simply bypassed us, we would have been occupying a useless forest that had no roads, bridges, or anything else of value. We would have been just sitting there, and after a week or so, we would have been without food or ammunition. The proper decision was to retreat and break through the Russian tanks at our rear, but army units could never get permission to do that because of Hitler's edict that the German army did not retreat. So von Doving said we had to man a defense line that just happened to be behind us, and it worked. We relocated our corps headquarters in a house in the forest and prepared a plan to break out of our encirclement. I took a motorcycle that had tank-type treads instead of a rear tire and went to the headquarters of the 20th SS Division, with which we no longer had wire communication and whose situation was completely unknown to us. Arriving without enemy contact, I exchanged situations with the division commander and submitted the orders we had prepared for the breakout. By staying put during the day and moving only at night, we hoped to get through the Russian lines behind us undetected. We did not know how strong the Russians behind us were, but we knew it was a tank force, and we knew that tanks could not fight well at night. We prepared and issued the necessary orders to our divisions, and at dawn, I again mounted the tracked motorcycle to find out how our movements from the Oder riverfront positions were progressing. I learned that everything was going according to plan. Then I visited the headquarters of the 2 divisions that had been transferred to our command for the breakout. They were under attack, and very glad to receive the orders to pull out that I had brought them. We discussed the necessary details for the operation planned for the coming night. Then I returned to Corps headquarters, having to stop to take cover a few times because low-flying Russian fighter planes were firing into refugee columns on the roads. At 12:30 a.m., we assembled. The 20th SS Division was to move to the right of the 168th Division, and the 2 newly acquired divisions were to follow us. We moved along a narrow strip no more than 1/4 mile wide on a route that was chosen to avoid any large communities. It was drizzling rain when we moved out in the darkness at 1 a.m. On March 19th, we marched in single file, using our maps and compasses and bypassing all villages. The Russian outposts remained very quiet. We let a passing Russian vehicle go by unmolested, and it never detected us. A horse-mounted Russian dispatch rider saw us and disappeared at a fast gallop. After a while, I took the lead and guided the group. Because too often in Russia I had seen infantry soldiers make mistakes reading maps. The wet ground absorbed the sound of our marching to a great extent. Those of us in the front of the column had to more or less feel our way in the darkness. Once I heard a loud moaning and panting sound in the darkness in front of me. With my pistol cocked, I carefully moved forward by myself, ahead of the column. When I saw something moving in a ditch, I called out in a low voice, but heard only continued moaning. Finally, I saw that it was a horse that had apparently fallen into the ditch in the darkness and probably broken a leg. I could not even relieve him of his pain lest the Russians in the vicinity be made aware of our presence. It began to get light about 5 a.m., but we still had to move another 500 meters to reach our destination, unfortunately across a deep and rather wide stream. Miraculously, we reached our objective without being detected by the Russians. I went to the edge of the woods to have a look and try to see what was going on. Now and then I could see Russian soldiers on foot, and an occasional Russian rider on horseback. It was obvious that we would be detected if we left the woods. Soon our patrol returned and reported that Riegersdorf had been occupied by Russian tanks. At about 8 a.m., a battery of heavy 105mm Mondeo self-propelled guns from the 168th Division joined us, and we changed our plans. One infantry battalion, together with the self-propelled guns, would attack Riegersdorf immediately, because the Russian tanks would be less efficient fighting within the village. One of our self-propelled guns destroyed a Russian tank at the entrance to the village, and the other Russian tanks, which were dispersed all over the village, disappeared toward the west. A second Russian tank was hit and slid into a ditch half on its side, and its crew got out and ran. We proceeded to the center of the village where we were stopped at a church. The Russian tanks had not left the area, but had taken position on a hill south of the village, at a safe distance, from where they now opened fire on our part of the village. Unfortunately, our battery of self-propelled artillery had rushed at full speed on through the village and gone on to break through to the German lines, and we no longer had their protection. The Russian tanks were consequently shelling every house now, causing a lot of casualties. When we spotted a company of Russian infantry approaching from the north, I ordered the commander of our assault battalion to secure and hold the part of the village we had gained. Some of his men panicked, however, and started to run away, directly toward the Russian tanks. I pulled my pistol and fired several shots into the air. This stopped some, but not all of them, so I shouted at them that the east edge of the village was occupied by the Russians, which might not have been true, but it got the attention of those who had not stopped when I fired my pistol. Now everybody settled down and dug in, and we held the village until evening. On our left, in the area of the L68th Infantry Division, we could hear the sounds of heavy combat, but we were not able to establish radio contact. Our little piece of the woods was circled several times by a Russian tank, but we left it alone, because to fire at it would have given our hiding place away and would probably have drawn a whole pack of tanks down on us. At about 7 p.m., a unit of 8 or 10 Russian tanks attacked from the south and tried to enter the village after 2 of them were hit by Panzerfausts. The others turned around and disappeared. Finally, at 8 p.m., it was dark enough, and we moved out through a depression north of the village. I again led the column. By 11 p.m., we were approaching Altenwalde. In theory, we had made it, but we could not be sure that the Russians had not reached Altenwalde ahead of us. In 3 days, much could have changed, so I stopped the column and sent a patrol on bicycles to the village, which was still several kilometers ahead. I sent word back that we would be delayed until the patrol returned. Then I sat down under a tree to rest and wait. When the patrol returned, it reported that our own troops were in control. When I attempted to stand, I was unable to do so. I don't know whether it was the cold or the tension of the last few days, but I was unable to move my arms and legs. Some of the men put me on a bicycle and pushed me along. After about 15 minutes, life began to return to my limbs, and by the time we arrived at the village, everything was normal again. So we had escaped encirclement, although some of our units were still missing. We had got out with most of our men, but we'd had to destroy all of our heavy equipment, because we could not use roads for fear of encountering Russian tanks. On March 20th, we established our headquarters in the house of the local sheriff, who happened to have a lot of good things in his pantry. In the morning, I took a car and started looking for our missing units, as did a number of other officers. After a lot of asking for directions, I finally found division headquarters in a village. When I entered the headquarters of the 168th Division, General Major looked at me with a bewildered expression. "You are alive," he exclaimed. "You are supposed to be dead."